What is up, everyone? We know the last thing you need is another fitness podcast to catch you up on the newest trends and fad diets based on popular opinion, not research. Enter myself and Tony. We made the Fitness Stuff podcast to make exercise and nutrition science practical. Our goal is to expose misinformation in the industry by providing only evidence-based education. Where today we are covering something I've actually been wanting to talk about for a while now, but we will be talking about binge eating, specifically binge eating disorder and what it is, the difference between binge eating and overeating, the potential neurobiological basis of binge eating disorder, triggers for getting stuck in the binge restrict cycle, and some tips for breaking the cycle once and for all. But before we get started, as a friendly reminder, the show is free and always will be free. And it's our passion to bring zero cost consumer education to as many people as we possibly can. And we like to always give you guys a little reminder that the best way for you to support us is by leaving us a little 5-star review on whichever platform you are listening on. It really helps us and allows us to reach even more people, and that's always the goal. So if you've done it already, it's easy. So if you've done it already, thank you so much. And if you are thinking about doing it, we would really appreciate it.
Because we know how many hours you stay up at night just thinking about if you should leave a review. Should I do it? Is today the day that I do it? It keeps me up at night. But we have another huge announcement as well. And that is that huge in our lives, maybe not yours, should be. Huge announcement, though, is our FS research review that we've been doing on Patreon for the last few months has been going super well. We've been putting a ton of time into it, and we really have caught a cadence in our stride, and we freaking love it. And we've decided to make a pretty big switching up on platforms. And we're doing that switch because of a couple reasons. One, Patreon just isn't super convenient or easily operated from the user's standpoint. And the whole reason we wanted to make this research review in the space that we thought we needed to is that research reviews in the past just aren't easily digestible. The communication lacks. It's not there. And that's the entire mission that we have, is to make it as easily digestible as possible. So we're switching over to our new platform, which is going to directly integrate it straight into whatever streaming platform you already listen to our normal podcast in. Meaning if you listen to on Spotify, on Apple Music, you're going to be able to listen to our research review, watch our research review straight in that same feed instead of having to go to a third-party app. Another and less important issue, I guess, is that Patreon as a company has been pretty negligent in handling certain allegations over the past few months that Mariana and I are just not super comfortable with. And that's been ongoing for some time. So that is another reason that we decided to switch away from that platform in general. But this one is just going to make it so much easier. So no longer needing to use a third-party app. You can listen to wherever we're going. Better features, more community features like Ask Me Anything episodes, and so much more. And that is live as of today. So if you're a patron already, we're still going to keep that content up for now, so you still have access to it, but we're going to email y'all how to get a discount in switching over, just because you guys have been rocking with us since the start. And if you want to go join in, it takes less than 10 seconds. We're going to put the handle down in our show notes below to now be a Fitness Stuff for Normal People premium member as well. Aside from that, well-winded, today's episode is brought to you by our BFFs over at Legion Athletics. We talk about them all the time, probably sick of it already. We use their products. I'm a big fan of their creatine, their protein, and their pre-workout, both stim-free and stim, but they're a proud sponsor of this show. We use them for a few reasons. One, because their products are freaking incredible. But two, their ethics align pretty much exactly with our own. They have an entire scientific review board reviewing every article, every podcast, every video they produce, including supplements by a team of MDs, PhDs, and other professionals. I mean, outside of their supplements, if you're a long-term listener of the show, you know that we push you guys to listen to their blogs and their podcast, which is all free. It's some of the best free education you can get as well. But we're pumped to be sponsored with them and working with them. You can use the Legion link in our bio or type the code FSPOD, FSPOD at checkout for 20% off your first order, or double points on every order after that. Today, we're getting back into it. Mariana's going to take us down a long road of a very highly anticipated, I think, and highly requested episode, diving into binge eating. But first, how you doing? Are you just jazzed after that announcement?
I'm so excited. Tony and I are constant learners, and we're always trying to optimize what we do, but we're also learning at the same time. We really just want to make it as easy as possible for you guys to be able to learn more in this space and break down a lot of the stereotypes behind the typical fitness industry.
Mm-hmm.
And we have found that our podcast is where we're getting most of you guys. You know, we're not really grabbing you from social media. Our listeners on our podcast are here to stay, and you guys are so awesome. We were so grateful for that. So we do not want to have to ask you to go somewhere completely different to get an extension of what we're doing. And this is just going to make it so much easier. So I'm so excited about it.
How's your day going?
My day has actually been great. How are you today, Tony?
Oh, you know how I am. No, I just spent like 20 minutes complaining to Mariana how dead I am. I just got back from When We Were Young festival in Las Vegas. My voice is a little raspy. Had the time of our lives, but we're back. And I'm more jazzed to be here.
Yeah,
what?
Tony went to Las Vegas this past weekend, and I went to indoor mini golf, and it was so much fun. And I won, and I never win anything, so I was so excited. It was so much fun. And I was in bed by like 11.
So we both had incredible weekends, is what it sounds like. So we both had incredible weekends. I actually do like putt-putt. Okay, so let's jump into this because this is a big episode. We're going to try and condense it to make it sound perfect. So where do we start? I want to ask you this. Of just what is binge eating disorder? Because this is a word I think that's thrown around all over the place. What exactly is BED or binge eating disorder?
Like a lot of eating disorders, words associated with them, like a binge, binging in general is just thrown around all the time in our society. You think about like, oh, Thanksgiving, I just binged on all of that food, or I had a big meal, or when you overate, like you associate that with a binge. No, binge eating disorder is a severe, life-threatening, but also treatable eating disorder. And it's characterized by recurrent episodes of eating large quantities of food, often very, very quickly and to the point of extreme discomfort. So a binge, and binges also happen in bulimia, another eating disorder. So people often combine these two and think like, oh, bulimia, binge eating, like same thing. Absolutely not. Binge eating disorder is the most recent eating disorder classified under the DSM-5 criteria. And the two differences between the two, they both involve a binge. And that's that episode where you eat a lot of food. And I want to be clear, like, especially if you've experienced them, this is also speaking from experience, like, you black out. These binge eating episodes, it's not just overeating to the point of like, oh, I'm so full, I need to unbutton my pants. Like, it is a lack of awareness. You don't really know you're doing it in the time, and you will start to feel sick during the time, oftentimes, and continue to eat, and you cannot physically stop yourself. That happens in these two eating disorders, but there are no unhealthy compensatory measures taken after the binge in binge eating disorder. So that's what's referred to as purging. That happens in bulimia. A purge can be making yourself vomit. It can be over-exercising. It could be really anything that tries to undo the binge.
That's purging.
That is a purge. Yep.
Oh,
and that does not happen in binge eating disorder.
Oh, so in binge eating disorder is separate. If you experience a purge afterwards, that's when it turns into bulimia. Okay. So it can be standalone. It's a lot more complicated than even I've realized. I know just talking through you.
Because there's a lot of similarities, of course, but that big piece of that binging piece is why they decided, because that's absent in binge eating disorder. And a lot more people were experiencing binge eating disorder. It's the most common eating disorder. And it was without this purging. So people could not be diagnosed with an eating disorder because they did not meet the criteria for bulimia. But so many people were experiencing this. And it was really a huge issue.
I didn't even know that. I was even guilty of years ago, just using the word binge, just throwing it around. Like, oh, I'm going to go home and totally binge on some of this, some Chick-fil-A, whatever like this. And I think people still do today.
Yeah.
And over years and talking to you even more and more and talking to others who have actually experienced binge eating disorder, you start to realize, oh, this is not something that I should just be throwing the word around for what I use. Yeah. Do you know when they started separating those?
2013, which is a while ago, but it's also not too
in the last decade.
Yeah. I also want to just give a really big disclaimer beforehand. I will be talking about the science behind the binge eating episode itself, how it takes place, some mechanisms as to why it occurs beyond your control. This is not an episode to diagnose or treat an eating disorder. I am not a doctor. I am not your doctor, regardless. And this is a very sensitive topic. So if you do really feel like you may be struggling with this and you need extra help, definitely, we'll talk about this more, but bring it up with some sort of specialist if you have access to them. This is just to explain the why, to foster a deeper understanding of how serious this mood disorder is in an effort to have it be taken more seriously by our society. So also so that individuals feel less shame around seeking out professional help, which is a huge symptom of this disorder, is a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. People don't talk about it. And then I also want to give you some tips that hopefully might be helpful if you're looking for something today. But
no, I think that's
a disclaimer.
The perfect place to start though is because I feel like the struggle with, and I'm glad that they're getting better at defining what exactly it is between, especially like even just in the difference between binge eating disorder and bulimia, like making the distinct differences, because I feel like, especially in the last decade, people throw around the word binge all the time, especially in the fitness industry, I think. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if you are actually struggling with BED, but you don't know it yet, you might, like you were saying, out yourself or discredit the actual issue at hand because you see other people doing it, but on the inside, you're like, well, what they're explaining it as and what I'm doing, like those are two different things. Same word, different things. So I think that's what hurts, is like when it discredits, you almost might talk yourself out of it. It's not really that big of an issue. They're doing it too, but on the inside, you know, it's not the same thing,
in the fitness community, it is unfortunately normalized, especially in bodybuilding. So with bodybuilding, that includes severe restriction, severe under-eating restriction, known, like you are well aware of that. And it's very common to either be fearful of a binge happening or take steps with a professional to make sure it doesn't happen after a competition. That is not binge eating disorder. You can still struggle with binging and not have binge eating disorder. That's where the nuances come into place. I'm not going to be talking about that. And that's something that, like, why it's so important to discuss this with a professional. But if you are cognizant that you are actively restricting and know that you are depriving yourself of food and are preparing yourself for this episode to happen, that is very different. But there are a lot of nuances there. People can experience a binge episode and maybe not be diagnosed or it not meet the diagnosis, but it doesn't mean it's not an issue.
Okay, so even there's so many levels. Like, again, extreme restriction that you see so many times in competition, in bodybuilding and physique prep. And like even leading up to that, even if you're not doing that, just what people have used the word for in the past. It's like there's so many different definitions of it.
And you can binge on so many things. You can binge on things outside of food, alcohol being another example.
But people use it for Netflix now. I'm going to go binge this TV show. I'm going to go binge. Like, it's such a widely accepted word.
Yeah. And this is also one more just disclaimer, like in anorexia nervosa, so under eating in recovery, a lot of individuals experience extreme hunger and eat a lot of food. That is not binge eating. It is common for people to fall into binge eating disorder after anorexia, but it's a very normal part of anorexia is to experience that extreme hunger, eat a lot more food. Again, it's that awareness piece. You know you're doing it. You're actively working with a professional to help work through that discomfort. So that's also different. I just want to make that clear. But there are also, like, when I say that this is debilitating, it affects people's lives. There's also so many physical and emotional health effects here. Medical consequences include high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, gallbladder disease, digestive problems, heart disease, and metabolic syndrome. So again, when we're talking about extreme amounts of food, I'm not talking about overeating. I am talking about an amount that you, if you've never experienced this, can't fathom. This is frequently accompanied by anxiety and depression. For some people, the anxiety and depression leads to binge eating disorder. Others, it's the other way around. But more than 20% of college-aged women have engaged in binge eating behavior. So that is just the act of binge eating, whether it's followed by purging or not. And then a similar percentage of the broader population will be affected by binge eating disorder at some point in their lives. So it's
that's been 5 people.
Yeah, it's really common. If you guys can take anything away from this, it's that you are not the problem. When you are experiencing this, it's just so easy to say, I have no willpower, I have a lack of self-control, what the heck is wrong with me? There is a lot out of your control here that can be helped, be improved. You can gain back control, but oftentimes you can't do that without professional help. I just really want people, if you take anything, like, it's not your fault. Like, this is a mood disorder, and there are a lot of explanations as to why this takes place. And when there's an explanation, there's typically either ways to try out a solution, ongoing ways, different things you can try, ongoing research to discover what a solution may be. Like, this is something that researchers are so invested in because it is so complex. It's not your fault.
I think that's what today's perfect for, right? The better understanding of it is just going to help us so much.
Yeah. So there is a potential neurobiological basis of binge eating. If you guys don't listen to Huberman Lab, I'm not sure if we have any fans here like Tony and myself, but he also has a great episode where he interviewed a professional in the area of binge eating and really dove really deep in there if you want even greater explanation. But I know a lot of the studies he's also mentioned before, but I definitely recommend that as well. But it is also hypothesized that eating disorders in general could be described as a continuum. And this has become more prevalent with even recent research. But the disorders can be characterized by restriction and appetite control, as being seen in anorexia, on one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end, disorders can be characterized by loss of control and increased appetite. That's binge eating, that's bulimia. So you have these two spectrums. And this hypothesis is what led researchers to really dive into our brains and researching the brain and what's going on here in people with these characteristics. So the restricted type eating disorders, anorexia, are associated with cognitive disturbances such as perfectionism, cognitive rigidity, problems with change of focus, and excessive attention to detail, ruminations, and obsessions about feeding and worry about body weight. So that's what you'll see in most people with anorexia. And then the impulsive type with binge eating and bulimia, it's characterized by an impulsiveness. You have a high excitability, some borderline personality traits, and a higher rate of substance abuse. So these are just observances that people have seen and researchers have seen in people with these disorders and the personality types. So that's more of like the psychological.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, because it makes so much sense when you line it up, but I feel like it's kind of like those two domains that, like, they're separate, but they totally overlap.
Yeah.
Like, that makes perfect sense when you put it like that. I've never seen like the restricted type versus the impulsive type, but it lines up so well when you're identifying different traits.
Yeah. That's like that aha moment, because is what I always like reach for when I'm trying to explain this, because there is a why for our actions. If you dig deep enough, there is always a why, and you can connect dots in a puzzle. And that can be so comforting. If you have the first step of a little bit of relief of taking that control and pressure off yourself, like, that can make such a huge difference for actual change. But so these personality types, these traits, is kind of what led researchers to dig even deeper into looking at the brain regions of people with bulimia and binge eating disorders. So they used functional magnetic resonance imaging, and this started with like rats and mice decades ago, but now we have recent research on humans looking at their brain regions as well. And they have shown that individuals with binge eating disorder have increased activity in the medial orbitofrontal cortex, so a region of the brain, and their reward processing area of the brain is also heightened. So very, very sensitive to images of high calorie foods. So in one study, when individuals were shown really high caloric, highly palatable foods, and these individuals had binge eating disorder, and then compared that to a group who didn't, these reward centers went off incredibly higher compared to those who didn't have binge eating disorder. So they have a heightened reward sensitivity in the brain. It's almost,
and that's just from images, right? That's just images.
Just from
no scent, no real, like not in real life. It's just images of.
Yep. So that's what the fMRIs are able to detect, and they're super fascinating. But it is, and you're not doing anything. You're not actively trying to think about it. It's just you're shown this, and let's look at what's happening in the center of the brain. And these reward centers are heightened. So that makes it look so much more appetizing, more palatable. It's harder to dismiss a craving. And I just find that to be so fascinating because, again, that's something outside of your control. And there are also different studies looking at when people have been shown like things about body image or looked in the mirror. And there is Albery and colleagues in 2016 used an emotional Stroop task, which measured the attentional biases in individuals with bulimia nervosa. So what they were biased towards, being more aware of, like interested in their brain centers. And they found a cognitive bias for food and body related cues in individuals with bulimia nervosa, but not in the controls. So that was something that like piqued interest in their brain when they showed it. And it is so interesting that just simply cues for body related issues, or even just talking about body image, sets off these centers in your brain. It's almost kind of like, I feel like it's like a warning. I don't know if I could picture like an alarm going off in your head. Like, that's kind of what...
and it seems uncontrolled by the individual. Like it just happens. It just happens.
So then other researchers compared the valuation of food versus non-food stimuli by overweight subjects with binge eating disorder, overweight subjects without binge eating disorder, and normal weight controls, and found that the binge eating disorder group showed a significantly stronger food bias compared to the non-binge eating disorder overweight subjects. So that means that their preference towards food was much greater, and the appeal and this reward center going off was so much greater than those who did not have binge eating disorder. So there is a chemical mechanism,
Seriously?
a neurobiological mechanism going on here. And again, this is so recent, and these findings are new that we're just starting to get into more studies. And these are randomized controlled trials that are kind of looking at interventions, but you can't look at the effectiveness of an intervention before you understand the why. So why these were so pivotal in this field of research is because now researchers can go on to start evaluating certain techniques and certain therapies and certain behavioral techniques you can use when these kids are young. If you know they may be predisposed to having this, if they have it in their family, because binge eating disorder can be genetic as well, or they can help families be more aware of the signs and symptoms and have a more effective approach. So that is like what is exciting about this is there isn't much conclusive evidence on how to treat, because there's so many different strategies, so many people are different, but knowing these mechanisms and understanding it at more of a brain level allows for us to research more effective concrete treatments. So
seriously, like it better shines a light on what the problem actually, like, I know it's, and this is just drawn from, like, I know Jordan Peterson talks about it all the time. If you really want to solve the problem, it's like you have to clearly be able to see it first.
Yeah.
So if we don't know what the problem is, like if we have a monster, but it's hiding in the dark, we don't know how to fight that because we don't know what it is. So it's like this research seems like it's just giving us more light so we can actually see what's going on. Right?
Yeah. And there are so many different reasons, in whether it's from your environment, your upbringing, your dieting history. Like, we'll get into that. There's so many different reasons that can exacerbate these symptoms, which is why it has been so difficult to study treatments. Okay, this is a similar basis along everyone who suffers from this binge eating disorder. There is one thing that we can look at that is consistent.
I have a question, and you might not have the answer to this, but it brought me up. I just found this one. I don't know if you saw the Huberman quote he posted a few days ago about addiction. And I put it in here that he just said, addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. Yeah. Is this related to addiction? Are certain eating disorders, especially like binge eating, could it be related or overlapping with addiction at all?
So this is something that I was going to get into a bit more, is exactly that. For some people, especially if you do have lower dopamine. This is seen in a lot of people with ADHD. This is one of the reasons why ADHD and binge eating disorder coincide oftentimes.
Really?
Is the dopamine released by the food. And also you're already viewing it as very palatable. You're more excited than the next person about it. Your brain is going to remember that more. It is going to almost completely change how you respond to something. So someone eating chocolate chip cookies that doesn't have binge eating disorder versus someone who does, they are going to be so much more palatable and so much more enjoyable. And then if you add in the, behavioral aspects of restriction or not allowing yourself these foods or having high stress, that just makes it even worse. But that's just at a baseline level. And that is why, binge eating disorder, before it was binge eating disorder, was, oh, you're just addicted to food. Like, people have food addiction. And it's like, these people have binge eating disorder that can make it feel like they are addicted to this food, but you are so focused on the pleasure. You are so focused on the reward. You are so focused on the response in your brain that you don't think about anything else. The narrowing of things that bring you pleasure.
It makes so much sense, again, when you walk through it and you see it like that. But on the outside, you don't see it like that.
Yeah, that's a whole different topic of, is sugar addicting? Is food addictive? Like,
totally different.
But feeling like a person's individual response to food can very much so act like an addiction. It's not the food itself. It is how you are feeling this pleasure and your response and what's going on in your brain. Food is not an addictive substance. It just cannot be classified as one.
Yeah, very good point, though, because you can technically be addicted to anything, but that doesn't make it addictive. I've never even thought about people's individual response when you see those light up in the brain scans. It makes so much sense, though. Those actions that follow make so much more sense. If you see that and these reward pathways light up, like, I'm just trying to imagine like what in someone without binge eating disorder would elicit a similar response, so others could maybe see it that way. I'm like, what do you think what are some examples of maybe like a response that would elicit just those reward pathways to light up in someone without binge eating disorder?
It's still rewarding. It's still tasty. It's just in those with binge eating disorder, these reward centers are significantly heightened compared to others. So more sensitive, and they just experience a greater reward.
Okay. So super magnified.
Yeah. Yeah. That is also something you would see just in addiction, is a greater reward. And this is not my field of research, but it's something I would love to learn more about, in terms of, I wonder if you could see in the brain if people are more prone to addiction than others. I don't know.
This is gonna be a rabbit hole after the episode. That's what we're doing for the next 12 hours. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
So there's even more research on this. Electroencephalographic, ERG. So this is another way to look at changes in the brain in individuals with binge eating disorder, bulimia. So researchers, what they do is they record the electrical activity produced by cortical neurons in the brain through electrodes placed on the scalp again. But this is different from just looking at images. So people just look at like scans in people's brains. It's like a different mode to kind of examine this. It's called ERP. What this can do is help improve our knowledge of the different allocations of attention towards food or towards body shape stimuli. So this is deepening our understanding of maybe why these people have a deeper preference towards food, or are more sensitive to when they're talking about body shape or look at pictures of body image. And these studies are useful to understanding the potential perceptual, motor, motivational, and emotional impairments linked to bulimia and binge eating disorder. So I know I've been saying bulimia and binge eating disorder, and again, they're not the same thing, but this binge eating behavior is largely what they're examining, which happens in both of these. So the most recent review of studies, it included 11 studies that analyzed Ps and looked at it in individuals with bulimia or binge eating disorder. And this review was done in 2019. And it's focused on the response to food stimuli among eating disorders. They classified it as with just an eating disorder. So they also looked at individuals with anorexia, but I'm not going to really be talking too much on that end of the spectrum, but also weight disorders. So like body dysmorphia, they looked at a lot of different types of people, which was really cool. And individuals who experienced binge eating exhibited an enhanced attentional response to food cues compared to healthy controls. So again, that's very similar. This is just another metric for showing this. Like this is, don't want to say better, but it helps deepen this like confirmation almost of this attention. And it demonstrated an altered initial cognitive response, mainly elicited by eating disorder cues. So food pictures, body images, and these changes can reveal an impaired allocation of motivational attribution or emotional based attention. What does that mean? So we all have like intentions behind our thoughts. Like, what are our thoughts driven by? What are they motivated by? And some people are more emotionally driven people. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about this. So some people are more emotionally driven. Some people are very, what would you call that? Motivational.
Logic?
Emotion. Yeah, more logical
More
thinkers.
logic driven?
They had more emotional based attention. That is just something that they gained from looking at this. So this impaired kind of their thought processes behind looking at these pictures of food. So this can help indicate that individuals with binge eating, who suffer from binge eating, have a different cognitive processing of stimuli. That right there, if you could take anything away from the more complex things that it is very complex. It's hard. I was trying to break this down as simply as I could, but when you're talking about the brain and the drivers for attention, but just even concluding, okay, people who struggle with binge eating, whether it's in bulimia or binge eating disorder, have a completely different cognitive processing ability when it comes to looking at certain stimuli. The whole cognitive process is different. The whole way of thinking is different. The motivators are different for how you are viewing these cues.
That's massively important to understand.
Yeah. And that's what these changes in the ERP measures like allow people to look at.
That's huge. I feel like that's, again, shining a brighter light on the problem. Like this almost seems like, oh my gosh, we might have been trying to solve the wrong problem to begin with. Not that it's like when you're trying to struggle to find a solution to a problem, it's like maybe you're working on the wrong problem to start with. So I feel like this further confirms it's like we got to treat this different because this might be a tangent a little bit, but I'm big on communication and like language. And it's interesting when you look at having conversations with people who speak one language. Because you and I are pretty much single language, right? Outside of like smaller pieces, but we were raised speaking English, where if you talk to someone who has English as their second learned language, right? If they first learned Spanish, or my girlfriend, for example, Polish, she grew up speaking Polish in Poland. It's interesting because different words, it processes different in the brain. Like communication just goes a different way. So you can't treat it like the same thing. It's a totally different avenue in the brain. And once you understand that, you can easily speak better to it. But you have to get that first.
So when you are showing these individuals, at least in these 11 different studies in humans, looking at using these ERP measures, and when you are showing these individuals pictures of food or body images, the way they experience that, viewing that whole process in their brain is different and it's impaired. The thought process behind it is impaired. So just if there's anything that can hopefully make you say like, hey, I'm not controlling this. I'm not actively trying to do this. And it's kind of like a what came first, the chicken or the egg thing. Like, are you born with this, or does this happen because you start engaging in binge eating behavior due to diet culture restriction? That's a tough one, which is why I wanted to bring back up a study that I mentioned in one of our studies that blew our minds episode. Then this one was looking at the brain scans of children ages 9 to 10, which with binge eating disorder. That's very young to be diagnosed. So what they showed was differences in gray matter density in your brain compared to their unaffected peers. And this was a recent study. This was released in March of 2022. So there absolutely are people who just have had this they were a child, and whether or not it's their environment that brings it out, or if it's just always been something that maybe parents have noticed since they were young. Like these findings suggested that abnormal development in the brain centers for reward and inhibition may play a role. So that's what we're talking about earlier with the reward processing, the heightened response to looking at food and viewing it as much more rewarding in people with binge eating disorder. This very well is something that can happen in growing up, and you can know you have in adolescence. So this really what this is hopefully going to help inform, because this is so new, is kind of the fact that maybe it's not so much a lack of control with a lot of kids who eat so much candy and can't stop eating, and you have their parents that tell them, no, you can't eat these, stop, restrict the sweets, restrict the snacks.
Yeah.
Well, now we know what's going on in their brains, and they're very likely to struggle with this later in life. How can we take a behavioral approach as a parent and maybe help intervene here to prevent it from getting worse later on? I'm excited to see what comes about of that study. But
I feel like that's huge too, to see it's not something that has to be developed later in life. Like this could be stemming from a long time ago.
Anyone experiencing this who's an adult right now, and you're like, wow, if I could have even made this more manageable, if I knew it was something I was dealing with, but made it more manageable to the point where it didn't affect my quality of life, or my health, that would have been great. And hopefully in 10 years, we have more. Those are common interventions for parents. And there is a common mode of treatment for kids or help. So bring that up again. Yeah, I talk about it in greater detail, just the study as a whole on that episode, which we can link in the show notes. I can't remember which one it was.
I was going to say, if we remember. If we remember.
But I do want to get into, yes, there is a lot going on from a neurobiological standpoint. That's one piece of the puzzle. It's super fascinating. A lot of people don't really know about this, but it's also a newer field of research. The causes of binge eating disorder are still, there's no specific cause. There's a lot of factors that can play a role in it. Your brain chemistry being one of them. There's also many psychological triggers for binge eating, such as stress, anxiety, depression. And that's another, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Do I have binge eating disorder and then start to develop depression? It can go both ways, but stress specifically can elicit binge eating behavior. If you seek out food to fill any emotional void, if your stress is much higher, you are going to be more likely to have a binge eating episode if that is something you struggle with. So a lot of people you will see, like, stress is very, very high. Food is viewed as an emotional relief. It's kind of counterintuitive, because what starts as emotional relief turns into this binge cycle and becomes uncomfortable. It makes your mental health worse. So it's like a counterintuitive thing. Binge eating disorder and clinical depression frequently co-occur, and the disorders may also develop at the same time. So also providing further information for how a lot of these things, that's so hard to control. Food disorders, that's not my field of expertise, but also the level of intervention that goes into treating those. And then you also have binge eating disorder as well. It's like, you can't look at depression and be like, yeah, I know you need therapy for depression. People go on medication. There's so many things you can do, but binge eating disorder, I'm not going to take that seriously. It is also a mood disorder. That's something that personally I find very frustrating, is that they're not viewed as a mental health ailment.
The more you keep talking about it, I'm like, this should be right there with them. And I'm even thinking even more as you're considering this and going down this. I mean, just like the word depression, it's like, depression is one thing. So if you say this causes depression or this helps cure depression, there's a million different kinds of depression. There's a million different kinds of like where it started from. I think the biggest part to understand is, just because you have depression or you have binge eating disorder and someone else does and they succeeded. We talk about this on the podcast all the time. Just taking the most individualized look at it is how you should probably problem solve. If it's weight loss, if it's health, like individuality, I guess I'm realizing more and more. No shocker to me, right? But more and more it goes even deeper in dealing with something like this.
It's honestly something that when it comes to mental health, or just when people talk about, this is how I stopped binge eating, like tips for stop, there is a time and place for people to explain some ways that you can improve binge eating. But for people, what's happening on the internet is this whole, this worked for me, it's going to work for you thing, not acknowledging the differences. Some people with binge eating disorder may not experience any stress or anxiety, although that's not as likely. Maybe it's completely just based off of restriction and dieting, and it's this habit loop they've fallen into, or their upbringing, or whatever. There is so many different reasons why. So there's also going to be so many different options for treatment that are not going to work for you, that might work for the next person. So also just keeping that in mind. I wish more people were clear and just open and honest about that, because how many times, like, so many people get frustrated from maybe trying a million things on the internet because they saw it on TikTok. But
what is it that's Dunning-Kruger just showing up in every aspect? Same thing with people who lost 20 pounds during keto, saying, I lost weight, you need to lose weight. Keto works. I feel like that's just in every aspect, but unfortunately, I feel like it's not as much talked about in mental health and in eating disorders. It's not nearly as talked about as people bringing it to fruition in training, nutrition, health, kind of stuff like that.
Yeah. And it's also like people ignore this chemical aspect and how that can get you so stuck in this endless loop of the binge restrict cycle, which I'm going to talk more about. So rewarding feeling of releasing all of that dopamine. You feel that a reward, your body wants it again. You fall into this habit of shame after you feel the reward. So you have this huge come down of shame and guilt. You hate yourself. That's typically what will elicit a lot of restriction, also societal expectations, self-doubt, triggers a lot of restriction. The restriction further adds to this reward and the food being so much more palatable, making you crave it so much more, because now you're telling your brain, who is already sensitive to this reward, to this food, that they can't you can't have it. And then again, only so long before you fall back into the binge. And it is this
and each time, so each time it gets, feeling would get stronger and stronger, like the deeper and deeper it goes because of that, right?
And it's like developing any habit. Obviously, like typically it like gets to a point where it's bad and it doesn't really get worse. People will have more frequent episodes, or it happened more often, but kind of like the level is the same. But that's when it's almost like, we talk about habit loops a lot. Yes, I had one binge and I have one every like 6 months or so. Now I'm having one like every other month. Oh no, I'm having it like once a month. Once a month turns into once a week. Once a week turns into like, that is how a habit, good or bad, forms. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is a very similar habit loop there. What's going on in your brain? It becomes just this subconscious behavior you engage in where you feel like you have no control over.
You're opening it up because, like, again, I've never seen it like that either, even though it's exactly what it is that habit loop of subconsciously it's controlling your behavior. But I feel like what sucks with this is people feel like it's a conscious choice. It's a conscious behavior, where these habit loops, I think of any daily habit outside of this that you might have. If it's brushing, if it's anything, it's just ingrained where your body just goes in that direction, regardless of if you want to or not.
Yeah. That's why it's like when people say, oh, I just like, whenever I felt the urge to binge, I just took a walk. No, like, sorry, it's much more complex than that. When you have been like, and that's also a problem that I won't get into in detail here, but you have a lot of people on the internet in the wellness, health and wellness space, like thinking that overeating is a binge, kind of confused, not really understanding binge eating disorder. And so then you have this person who knows nothing about it, but thinks they can relate, and they're not at all relating. So people actually suffering with this feel like absolute shit, because they're like, oh, you're telling me I can go for a walk? That's funny, because 2 hours ago I was fine, and now I've eaten every single food item in my house and I don't remember. And like, this is, people will throw food out, eat it out of the trash. People will like wait until their partner goes to sleep and eat. I'm going to be fucking whatever. I have eaten food out of the trash before. Like, I have literally eaten food out of the trash, and I fell into binge eating because of my anorexia, but it was so much more. I was so aware. And like, when I fell into it, I was in getting help. So I'm so fortunate that it didn't like it wasn't often. I was like one of those people. It happened like once every 2 months or so. People will do that. Happens every day.
But then when you hear people say like, oh, next time, like just try and go for a walk. You're like, that's not a choice. That is not an option. That is not an option just to go, oh, I'll just take a walk instead. It's not like I'm hungry and I just want to eat a little bit. Let me go get my mind off it. That's not the same thing.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with like, and we'll get into this more, some tips, but it's not just a matter of allowing you to have the food, because if you allow yourself to have the food to break this cycle, then you also have to be open about, oh, I'm probably going to binge on this for a little bit until I normalize it within my brain. There's no just quick fix. It's a long road you have to commit to. But again, there are those psychological triggers, the chemical triggers that we were talking about beforehand, and also that piece of the release of dopamine. So you have the neurobiological aspect, you have the chemical aspect of eating food releases dopamine, and food makes us feel really fucking good. For some people, food feels a million times better. Okay. And that's where I think it's so fascinating. A lot of the new research coming out about people with ADHD also having binge eating disorder. People with ADHD don't produce as much dopamine. So when they do have experiences that elicit a dopamine response, how they feel that is so much heightened compared to the next person. And then you also have individuals with ADHD who are taking like medication, also typically tend to forget to eat or don't eat much during the day because their medication. That further adds to you being at risk for binge eating, because then your hunger gets really high once these meds are out of your system. So that's a whole field of research that if you're interested in it, I definitely suggest looking into, but I didn't want to get too off topic here. And then again, the restriction, chronic dieting, that's like a third trigger that can fall into any of these. But typically this is common amongst, whether or not you're experiencing this primarily from psychological level, chemical level, whatever, this is very similar amongst many people who can't get out of this cycle, because that restriction piece plays such a huge role in why so many people have a hard time getting out of this. And dieting, obsessive thoughts about food, and can lead to feelings of extreme hunger. So that hunger demon, I've talked about it before. If you are restricting and you also know you're prone to binge eating and you've done it in the past, or maybe you've never had an episode and you're restricting a lot, that's why it's also a risk for binge eating. But that restriction combined with hunger is the worst recipe for anyone trying to work on their binge eating. When people experience the increased thoughts about food and hunger together, you're way more likely to binge. So that is a thought that's very hard for people to wrap their heads around, especially if the restriction is from a place of fear of food. So a lot of people with binge eating disorder don't restrict. Some do. The majority of people with bulimia nervosa do fall into this binge restrict cycle, and also the purging would be coupled in there. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Again, the binge eating can occur first. If you are binge eating out of emotional distress, you're using food as a way to cope, that can also lead into you restricting your food intake after a binge because you feel shameful about engaging the behavior or whatever, or the restriction can come first. So there's no one way this happens. It can happen both ways, which is important to think about. If you think it would never happen to you and then you start chronically dieting, your risk for developing a binge eating behavior, habit, disorder, whatever, significantly goes up.
Yeah.
It's another reason why I'm very passionate about non-restrictive diets, because they set you up for failure. We talk about this all the time, and this is one of the things that they do. But yeah, so those are some common triggers. Again, that's not even all of them. It's very complex, but we do like to try and provide as much help as we can through this podcast. You could take away information. If there's something you can try to make your life a little bit easier, some tips, we are going to go through those. But beforehand, seek professional help first. If you have been diagnosed, if you are worried about your symptoms, if you feel like this could be you, always, always, always seek professional help first, because we are so individualized. What's a course of action to take if you are really looking to seek outside help? The first thing I would recommend is looking at your state's website of registered dietitians and looking at which registered dietitians take your insurance if you have it. Again, I know so many people, and especially in the US, not everyone has insurance, or registered dietitians are not covered under insurance. So I'll talk about a solution there, which sucks in and of itself. But once you do find those dietitians that are under your insurance, look into them, see which specialize in binge eating disorders, binge eating behaviors, because there are many. This is something that registered dietitians specialize in. They specialize in eating disorder therapy, eating disorder research, specific eating disorders, and they will work with you and have many more tools than I or Tony could ever give you.
Yeah.
You may need a referral to see them. That's when you would go to your primary care doctor, get a referral. But a lot of the times, if your insurance takes them, you can set an appointment. It won't be right away. The wait list is typically pretty long. But if you do not have insurance, you can't afford this just out of pocket, then I would look into some of these registered dietitians who may also offer online courses, and they don't have to be in your area. That opens up anyone if they have an online course. R and RD, again, that's really important because although there are people, coaches, nutritionists, researchers, people who can help you, they shouldn't be your first place to go. I find that those people can be really helpful if you have had an experience in the past and you're trying to work on still just furthering your relationship with food, but you've seeked out professional help. Like, they can serve a time and place. That shouldn't be your first go-to just because of the severity of this. And it's almost like when you see a therapist, you want to make sure that they are a therapist.
And even past the title, I can't emphasize enough like how much finding the right specialist matters. Yeah. Past the title. So yes, RD, great, but there's going to be RDs that probably could change your world for everything positive, and some that you might feel frustrated and make things work. The specialized piece, it's something that Mariana and I have both struggled with. Was it you in finding this, or was it going through different gut health? Which ones were you saying before on our podcast?
It was for my gastroenterologist.
How many different specialists did you go through until you finally found the one that made?
Oh, I think I went through like 6.
Yeah. And same when I was going through type 1 diabetes in the first few years, I had to go through, I think, 4 or 5 endocrinologists until I found one that finally could really help me with the problems I was trying to solve. If you feel like you're not getting help, try and look. And I would say reviews is probably one of the better places to look for people struggling with your individual problems. Because like we even said, just because someone else got helped with binge eating disorder, your binge eating disorder is probably completely different than theirs. So just because that solution worked for them, it might not work for you. So really go as specialized as you possibly can to your issues is where I would really emphasize.
And there are some great online courses out there. There are great podcasts. Brain Over Binge. If you haven't listened to it yet, I highly, highly recommend it. The book Brain Over Binge also, that is what led me to getting a registered dietitian in the first place and actually opened my eyes to, wow, there's so much of this that is out of my control. So that is a great resource. And it can be comforting to have a little bit of reassurance. And also, reason why I said don't go see your primary care doctor first is, one, that's not their specialty, but 2, unfortunately, people with binge eating disorder, oftentimes, again, there's no size for any eating disorder. They can't be classified by your size, but with anorexia, there are some differences there with being underweight. But unfortunately, with binge eating disorder, especially with no purging, typically individuals are maybe overweight or obese and not often taken. This isn't often taken seriously. It's definitely gotten better since this has become a eating disorder, actually categorized as one, but still, unfortunately, a common recommendation is to just lose weight, eat 1,200 calories a day and move more. Yeah. And it's so much more than this. That is just a small side note there. Outside of that full disclaimer and maybe giving you guys a point of action if you feel like you need one, there are a few tips that you can maybe try one today, or maybe make you think about some things you're already doing that may be adding to some binge eating behavior. But first that I put down here is, especially based off of everything we just went through, is to stop dieting. And that's doing that, stop dieting in terms of, I say dieting in terms of all of it. If you are struggling with binge eating consistently, dieting and restricting in any way, because Tony and I, we are huge advocates for being able to lose weight in a sustainable way that you can adhere to. That is not, if you are suffering with this, that's
Shouldn't be
not
your
for
goal.
you.
Yeah.
You need to, because even just the thought of restriction, even if you're still eating your foods but you're trying to restrict your calories, that can contribute to the cycle. Again, we're trying to break the cycle. So not restricting, not dieting is the first biggest step that you have to commit to.
Yeah.
And
that's
is
huge.
Something that many dietitians will tell you, specialists like in this area. If you cannot fully commit to that, it's going to be a long, hard road, because this cycle can't be broken without one of the leading contributors here.
Yeah.
So
you can't try and solve both at the same time. It's great. Like step one, like knowing and understanding if you have it, seeking a professional, like finding out, great. But if you try and solve too many things at once, you're just going to be stuck in the same place. That's a big one.
Yeah. And just a study here, one study in 496 adolescent girls found fasting, so a type of restriction, was associated with a higher risk of binge eating. And then another study in 103 women noticed that abstaining from certain foods resulted in increased cravings and a higher risk of overeating. Those are just a few. There's so many studies like that looking at the food behavioral tendencies in restriction, prolonged dieting. Focus, if you could do anything, if this is if you're first hearing, stop restricting, stop dieting, that's easier said than done. A tip here is to focus on specific ways maybe that you can improve your diet. It's not just concrete, I'm going to stop thinking about food. That's not realistic, especially if it's been on your mind all the time. But if you can just start to think about ways that you can improve your diet, what you can add to your diet, not restrict from your diet. And this is also a tip for people who are looking to improve their diet and want to prevent this from happening. Food is not black and white. And this restriction can really just be something that starts out as completely harmless, and it's easy to fall into. So being mindful of that throughout your process, if you are someone who is on their weight loss journey or is starting it and maybe a little bit worried about this happening because you've seen so many restrictive diets thrown at you. So that is one. And again, easier said than done, which is why we mentioned having someone to help you do that. But another one that may be a little bit more simple to conceptualize is adhering to a regular eating schedule. So skipping meals can add into that like restriction piece, but prolonging like when you eat, like putting it off, having a really small eating window can increase your risk for overeating. If you are on a regular eating schedule, you are letting not only your body, but your brain know that you are satisfying your energy cravings. So not specific food cravings, but energy cravings. Even if you have food cravings, if your energy cravings are satisfied, they're going to be a lot less loud. So I know there's no perfect time, there's no ideal eating time, but if you do struggle with binge eating, having an eating schedule that is consistent throughout the day, that doesn't just leave room for one meal or just two meals completely spaced out, that can help you. Another that is completely away from dietary approach, but improving your sleep. So again, as we've mentioned, that there are so many factors that can play a role in these behaviors. Sleep deprivation is one of them. It has been shown to alter the levels of hormones that affect hunger and appetite. And again, there's some people that just run on no sleep and this doesn't happen to them, but it's definitely something to consider if you also have not been prioritizing sleep. And shorter sleep duration is associated with higher levels of the hormones I was talking about, ghrelin, and lower levels of leptin. So leptin is your fullness hormone, ghrelin is your hunger hormone.
Perfect cocktail.
Yeah. So if you feel like, okay, maybe I'm not too comfortable right now with the dietary approach, but I really do know my sleep needs improving. Okay. And that will improve so many different other aspects of your life. But again, it's a common one that people dismiss and how that can affect your hormone levels there. And then another tip is actually something that I do with my clients just in general who are either working with a specialist or have had a history of just restriction, maybe not even binging, or just have a little bit of anxiety around food. So is keeping an eating behaviors journal. So this can be helpful for literally anyone, especially when eating in America, at least, is just so mindless oftentimes. What this can do is help track what you eat, how much you eat and how you feel. So it makes those connections. So you're not tracking what you eat in the sense of, oh, I'm keeping track of every single food. It's just like, okay, were there any specific foods that I ate today that I maybe felt out of control around, or after I ate them, I felt like I needed a lot more. And then what was I feeling on this day? Was I stressed? Did I have any life events happen? Did anything happen at work? Did I not sleep last night? Keeping track of those. And did I overeat or did I undereat? So picking up on those patterns can help you identify certain triggers. So connecting the dots of like, oh, I know today I was really stressed. I didn't sleep last night. I got into it with a coworker and I skipped lunch. I need to make sure that I prioritize having a filling, satiating meal tonight and allow myself some sweets because I know I've been a little bit stressed. And if I don't allow them, I'm going to want them so much more tomorrow. Yeah. Little things like that. So just becoming a bit more aware, picking up on patterns. And then this also can help you maybe notice, oh, wow, I'm stressed a lot every single day. Or I boredom eat a lot every single day. What are maybe some interventions I can add into my life personally that can give me some stress relief or fill those holes in my day where I tend to overeat? Is there anything I can do? So something like that. Another one that's super important is social support. So I know this is not easy for everyone. I know not everyone has this, but even finding one person, a peer, anyone in your life that you feel like you can bring this up to, that you can even just voice it out there into the world, and really, really help, because that feeling of guilt and shame associated with binge eating can contribute greatly to this cycle. So speaking it out there into the world, having someone listen to you, just therapy in general, so helpful for so many things. And this is one of those things that just talking about it can be really helpful, because doing something so subconscious and feeling like you're not in control, you're not in the driver's seat of your own body, it's very easy to black that out and to not really bring that into the reality, because you're not aware when you're doing it. And if you're ashamed of something and guilty about something and you feel like people are going to judge you for doing it, you're embarrassed, you're not going to want to think about that. And sometimes like doing that hard thinking, it's not easy, but talking about it forces you to do that. And then more practical approaches to address the restriction side is increasing your protein and fiber. So maybe you are just not feeling satisfied after meals and you've really been trying. Like, I know I've been working on eating more. I feel like I've been doing good at that. I feel like I've been allowing myself foods that I used to not allow myself. Well, I'm still binging, or I'm still not feeling satisfied. Then maybe look at your meals, look at like your larger meals. Do I have protein in there and fiber, both of which can help increase your feelings of fullness and the duration in which you're full? So sometimes I'll just recommend to my clients even like, okay, I have my high protein, high fiber lunch, but I'm also like, I'm satisfied, but I'm just going to have a little bit of chocolate with that too, because I know me, I know myself, and I crave this often. But if I'm eating this at a time where I'm not super hungry, I'm going to feel completely in control. And again, that's not an always thing. It's not like always eating chocolate all the time, every single day. It's just
it's funny you use that example. It's literally what I have to do with dinner. Is I could be completely full, but if I don't have that little itch scratched, I know it's going to be driven. So I just got to have a little something, because I know, it's just like a little check mark. Yep. Good to go. Where if I don't, it just becomes the entire page.
Yeah. And then again, avoiding that hunger demon that I talked about in terms of the restriction cycle. So planning out your meals, giving yourself that sense of, I know I either have food waiting at home for me, or I know I'm going to have food I'm going to be able to bring to lunch. I can bring snacks. I'm going to prevent that extreme hunger that I know is a trigger. I can prevent that. I can be in control. This is just one of those pieces. And this is a tip for anyone trying to maybe just have any goals when it comes to nutrition. Planning out your meals can be very, very helpful. And I'm not talking about structuring it out, planning it, adding it to MyFitnessPal. I'm just, even when you're going grocery shopping, thinking about what you're going to have for lunch and dinner and having that ready for you, so that if you are feeling an urge to binge, if you open up your fridge and you do see these meals right in front of you, stimulus may just make you think once more about doing it and prevent you. It's those little things. And again, these are not fixes. These are some behavioral adjustments, tips that might help you, might not. Taken together, trying a few out, being consistent with them can be impactful with the correct help depending on the severity. That's my dive in there. I don't know if I missed anything.
Deep dive.
Hopefully that gave you some either peace of mind, a direction in terms of where you can personally go from here. If you know someone that struggles with this and you think this podcast might be helpful, send it along to them. Maybe you got a tip here that you want to try out, a resource, anything. I will feel satisfied from it. That's
yeah. I already know it's going to help a lot of people just because of how many people struggle with this, but there's a lack of places to go, help to find that are like easily available like this. So I know it's going to help a ton of people, which I'm pretty freaking pumped for. Because I know we've both gotten requested about this so many times.
Yeah. And so this is the best place because it's not something I could just talk about in 3 minutes or quickly answer because it is so complex.
This is why we didn't make it a TikTok. Everybody or an Instagram post. It's a little bit deeper than that, as you can tell. So if you need to, download, re-listen, send it, check, ask for questions. If you need clarification, we both have direct messages. Hit it up. We're here to help. But I'm pumped that we finally got this one done. I'm pumped to continue going deeper. It was heavy, but it's cool because now we have more, because now that we're moving over to this new platform, right, with our research review, and we're spending more time there. We're going down to one episode a week on Mondays instead of episodes on Mondays and Fridays. So we're able to put so much more effort into each episode prep like this one, right? With how many countless studies, actual prep. Like sometimes you don't realize like prepping these episodes take hours and hours of our time, and we want them to be the highest quality to help you out. And that's why we're doing this switch, which gives us so much more time to pour into each and every episode, which we think, as you can tell from today, is going to help a lot more. So we can't wait to continue in that direction.
Excited.
Where can people find us, Mariana?
They can find us on Instagram and TikTok, fs.pod, YouTube, fitness stuff for normal people if you want to give us a watch.
And FS Research Review, our best extension, down below.
So I'm excited. Big things.
We're excited. Big things. All right. Y'all have a beautiful rest of your day. Have a great weekend.
Yes.
If you're listening to this at the end of the week, great start to your week if you're listening to it then. We love you. Have a productive day.